Alright, continuing on from the previous one, we've got a movement system set up. We're going to add some shooting with particle effects. So we're going to import that standard particle package. We're going to create a folder called extracted particles. Then we're going to add this muzzle flash to that folder on the left. Then we're going to open metal impacts and drag out only the sparks, because that's all we need, and we'll put that in extracted particles. Then we'll open up the materials, drag in the sparks and the muzzle flash, and then we'll drag in the required textures. As shown here, now we'll have all required files. We'll just drag it into the scene, test it out, see if it works after we've deleted all the other stuff that we don't need. If that works, and this works. So, moving on. Let's delete these once we've saved the prefabs. Now we're going to set up the player. We're going to add a game object called gun. It'll be an empty. Then under it, we're going to add a cube, make it long and skinny, and that'll represent the gun mesh. But then we're also going to have to add an empty object, which we'll call the muzzle. This is where our bullets will be spawned, where our muzzle flashes will be spawned. We'll also add an audio source to it. This will come in later when we add sound effects. So going into the player script, we're going to add another struct. We'll add a float for the range, a layer mask to determine what the bullet can hit, add in a transform where the bullet will spawn, add in the object, which will be the muzzle flashes, and the impact object, which will be the sparks. Then we'll keep track of how long it's been since we fired our last shot, so we can see if it's been long enough so we can fire another one. Make this public so we can access it, and now we can set everything, the range, all of it. Let's reset the transform on those spark prefabs, set it as a muzzle flash object. Now let's go into the scripting, add a new script called shooting, make it a static. Now we'll add a public static void that our player update will call. We'll take in the shoot settings that we just created. Now we'll add in a bool, pulling trigger, and if we are pulling the trigger, then we'll shoot. However, there's another condition that enough time has passed since the last shot, which will depend on our fire rate. So if our fire rate is 8, that means 8 rounds per second, which means you can fire a shot every 1/8 of a second. Let's just increase the time since the last bullet every frame. And enough time has passed and we are pulling the trigger, then we can fire. Let's create a static void. This won't be public because it will just be called from within this script. It will not be called from the player script. So every time we fire, the time since the last bullet is 0 because we just did it right then. And we will instantiate a muzzle flash. So it'll take the muzzle flash OBJ from the shoot settings, instantiate it where the muzzle transform was, and parent it to the muzzle. Then we'll return the shoot settings to this so that we can keep track of that new time since last shot is 0. Here we'll set shoot settings to the function. Okay, let's test it out. Now the problem here is that every muzzle flash is being spawned on every shot, but then it's also looping again in future after it's played out. So we'll turn off looping and set stop action to destroy, so that once every muzzle flash is played, it gets destroyed, never to be seen again. Okay, that's working quite nicely. Moving on. Now we're going to say that if we hit something, so if physics.raycast fired from the muzzle position, sent in the direction of the muzzles forward, we'll declare a raycast hit called impact, which we'll use to get data such as where we hit, put in the range and the layer mask, which we set to default earlier. So we'll instantiate the impact sparks at the point of impact and in the direction of the normal of the surface that we hit. That's what that code means. Let's go to player. Let's set the sparks to destroy on stop. There, so now when we hit something, the sparks will play and then destroy themselves. Okay, it works nicely. Moving on. Okay, we now we'll work on sound. So I'll add a public audio source that we can reference and access in the shooting because we'll pass it via the shoot settings. We'll also add an audio clip called a gunfire loop. Now let's add another public static void, which will be initialize. We'll just call that in the void start method of player. And we'll set the audio source clip to the gunfire loop and set loop to true because we're doing an automatic weapon. Now we'll initialize there, as I said. Now in fire, we'll play the audio source. Let's drag the audio source into there. Let's import the gunfire loop sound, put it in as the gunfire loop in shoot settings. Now we'll press play and you'll find that the problem that we're having is that every time we fire a bullet, it's playing, so it's going back to frame 1 instead of letting the clip play out. So what we need to do is check that if it's playing, then we won't tell it to replay, and we'll also add a method called stop. So when we stop firing, that sound will stop playing. So I'll call the reference the audio source and tell it to stop. Now let's play it. It's playing, but now it's not stopping because we're not actually calling that fire_stop method. So if we're not pulling, if enough time has passed, but our sound is playing, yet we're not pulling the trigger, then call that fire_stop. Now let's see what happens. And the sound stops as well. Very good. I'll put in another audio clip, the gunfire trail, so that when we stop, we can just hear the trail of the sound instead of it just cutting off abruptly. That would be weird. So when we fire stop, we'll tell the audio source .clip to transform to the gunfire trail. We'll put that gunfire trail into the player script. Another problem with the sound here is that when we start firing again, it's not changing from the gunfire trail to the gunfire loop. We'll have to fix that later. Now, a problem is that every frame we're stopping once we've stopped pulling the trigger. So we'll have to add another condition inside the maybe shoot. So if our sound clip is not the gunfire trail, it's important to have that extra parameter. Now we're going to add the bullet effects. It'll just be an empty with a line renderer, and we'll add the metal spark shader. Now we're going to make it long and skinny. And we're going to delete it because we've saved the prefab. Then we're going to put the prefab into the player, except we can't because we haven't added it in the code. So we'll add that bullet OBJ to the code, and we'll instantiate that OBJ every time we fire. So, you know, muzzle position, muzzle rotation, null parent, so that means it's not parented to the gun, meaning that if you move the bullet, it just ignores your movement. There, now we're instantiating them, but the problem is so we're going to add a new script called projectile. This now click on the bullet effects and add that new script, projectile. Currently doesn't do anything, so we'll scrap everything in the code and add a public float called speed, the speed at which the bullet will do, and we'll make it delete after a few seconds. So every frame, we'll make it translate 1 meter relative to its own rotation. And if it's run out of time on its timer, then it will delete it, so the bullets don't stick around in world space forever. Now we'll also save the projectile script within the shooting so that we can change stuff such as the bullet speed. we'll assign it a speed that will set in the player shoot settings. And we'll also control the speed within the projectile script. Let's test it out now. Set bullet speed to 10, and you can see now it works, but it's going straight through objects. It doesn't care at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the code up to calculate the distance to the surface that we're pointing at, and then set the timer so that the bullet deletes itself the moment that it crashes into a surface. So let's just add some comments first. Now we're going to set the bullet.time until deletion using the vector3.distance function to get the distance between the impact point and our muzzle position. Now if you see, it's hitting right at the edge, but it's not going through, which means our code works. Anyways, that should just about wrap up the video. So thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and if you have a problem with the video or I've missed something, please tell me. I'm going to add follow-up videos allowing us to add recoil, as well as a hit point script allowing us to actually destroy stuff.